Amen.
Amen.
Never-ending battle.
Yes.
Okay, well, we're going backwards from Friday night to catch everybody up. So we're going to go back to your sheet. That's the first book. And I told the people, usually, when you do Torah portions, you have what they call as the half Torah. And I wanted you guys to be a little bit aware of what the half Torah was, because different cycles, sometimes they do Torah portions and sometimes they do half Torah portions. And half Torah portions you'll find with every reading. So, when I give out, like for Rashid, if I say, okay, it's Genesis 1:1 through 6:8, the half Torah portion for that would be Isaiah 42:5 through 43:10, and then it'll dovetail into the New Testament, which would be John 1 through 18. So why did they break that thing up and do Torah portions and half Torah portions? So what happens is, nobody knows why they did the half Torahs for sure, but they knew during the time of Antioch Epiphanes, the Torah readings were not allowed. Okay, so because the Torah readings are not allowed, they made a substitute until they were allowed to study the Torah once again. So the half Torah readings would go as far back as 70 CE, which is the Common Era. And so that's how the half Torah comes into being. As you read through, the half Torahs, you can see how they fit into the Torah readings. Okay, and that's a whole different. I thought at one time maybe when we finish this year's cycle, I might just do half Torahs, because you can tie the half Torahs into the Torahs. Like, Genesis starts with creation, and Adam and Eve, and you're going to find that that's going to dovetail into the half Torah portion. It's going to go almost hand in hand with it. That's why, Isaiah will go into it, starts with God as the creator of heaven and earth. So that's how the two just sort of mark together as one. I was going to mix them together and do them all together this year, and it's just too much. I ended up with, I think, 12 pages just on Genesis. And then I went back because John and Larry and Lynn and Joshua were all with me the other night when I did Genesis. So the other day I sat down and I thought, okay, I've got so much information, so I've re-ramped this thing from when I talked to Larry the other day, because I handed out originally pieces of paper that had the beginning sentences, the beginning sentence in Hebrew. And I knew just by looking around at everybody, they had no clue. When I said, okay, here's the bet, this is what bet means, this is what aleph means, this is what this means, and take this word and you rearrange the letters and you come up with this, and they all look like they had question marks on their face.
Well, we have to learn the Hebrew alphabet to be able to keep up with you.
So I thought, okay, so I spent this week, I went back and I broke this thing down, so hopefully, you'll be able to, and I wrote this up beside it, which will give you at least some idea. Oh, thank you. Some idea of what, so when we get to this point, you'll have some idea of what, I'm going to, talk about, so at least you won't look at the first line and say, what in the world is she talking about? You'll have some idea. Are you confused yet?
We haven't begun yet.
Yeah, that's what I said. Are you confused yet? So, this is 2014-15 Torah portions. We're going to do the first 5 books again from Genesis 1:1 to Deuteronomy 34. We'll look at it again, as I said, from a Hebraic perspective and not from the Western mindset that everybody's been taught. To do this will require a new way of thinking on the part of you guys. And we're going to look at words and what they mean in Hebrew. We're going to have, sometimes I'm going to hand handouts like I did this morning. I still got another page to give you guys on, on the Hebrew. And you got to look at the Jewish history, and you got to look at the culture that they were living in, which we found out on Friday night when we talked about the tent. for example. So Torah, sometimes called Tanakh, it's the first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible, and it means teaching or instruction. So with the teaching or instructions, whatever it's called, you know this is going to be the instructions for us that we're going to have to learn throughout our life. So here you're going to find how God is going to instruct the people on how they were to live. God's the same yesterday, today, and forever, so how he instructed them, he's going to instruct us on what we have to do. And, if he instructs them on what they were supposed to do, he's going to also tell them what they cannot do, and the blessings if they followed him, and the cursings if they didn't. So, we also find that the Bible has hidden meanings that we don't understand because we have been, we haven't been taught. I mean, this is a whole new avenue for everybody, and so over the centuries, we've lost so much stuff that had been handed down, it's almost like when you sit in a room and you whisper, if I whisper in Larry's ear a phrase, and he whispers to Darlene and goes around the room, by the time it ends up with Sarah, it's nowhere near what I whispered in his ear. And this is what's happened with this, over the centuries, it's just lost. It's nothing like, and then you compound it, if you were to sit and to write something today, and 2,000 years pass, and somebody picks up and sees what you read, they go, what in the world was she talking about, or he talking about? Because it's totally different. So this is what we're facing when we do that. The best thing is today, we have the ability to research. We have the ability to go back and to dig in and just to find out, what they were trying to say and try to find the answers. And of course, the Bible's one book. You can't have the new without the old. You just can't. It does not work that way. So anytime you have, ministers that are just strictly New Testament preachers, how can they do that? They can't, The time that Yeshua walked the earth, the New Testament wasn't even written. So he's going to follow the Old Testament or the Old Covenant. So it has not been done away with. Even Yeshua's going to talk about in Matthew that, he came not to destroy the law, which is the Torah, or the prophets, but, to fulfill. So he's going to fulfill what's in the Old, and that's why it's so vital. And everything that's found in Genesis, you're going to find copies of in the book of Revelation, because it's going to weave all the way through. So we're going to look at that a little bit. Again, a lot of things in here, and we found this out on Friday night, there's a lot of idioms in there. Webster says an idiom is an expression that cannot be understood from the meaning of its separate words, but it has a separate meaning of all its own. It's like with me with a gal nipper. When Lynn first moved in here, he said, Pastor Shea said there's a gal nipper in the house. What's a gal nipper? He had no idea. Well, gal nipper's a bug. But it's a separate phrase. It's an idiom for me for a bug. Larry sort of gotten used to that over the years, haven't you?
Well, I keep thinking about is stink 'em.
Stink 'em, yeah. That's another one we won't go into. That one. Smile, John. It was funny.
Come on, John.
It wasn't
Lighten
for
up.
It wasn't for him.
All right, come on.
So, what was Jesus saying here? If you don't know Moses, what he wrote in the Torah, then how can you understand what Yeshua is saying today? You can't. You have to understand what Moses was saying. So this year I want to really go into some in-depth teaching that will hopefully change the way you're going to look at scriptures and make you scratch your head and think, oh my gosh, or, and hopefully instill a little bit in you guys to want to study and really get into the Word and dig this thing out and study it. So, the more you study, the more you learn, and you never finish learning. It doesn't make any difference. You think you've know it all. Well, guess what? God will come along and say, you think you know it all? No, you haven't known nothing. And he will take this thing and he will change it, from the get-go, right from the beginning. I thought when I started this Torah course, I thought, oh, this is going to be a repeat, what I did 2 years ago. No, something totally different this year. So anyway, here's part 2. Sarah, hang that out so you'll have both pieces when you get started. So I'm excited about it. So while she's handing it out, I'm going to start reading Genesis to you a little bit, so we get through the days of the week here. In the beginning, God creating the heavens and the earth, when the earth was astonishingly empty, and darkness upon the face of the deep, and the divine presence hovered upon the surface of the waters. And God said, let there be light, and there was light. And God saw that the light was good, and God separated between the light and darkness. And God called the light day, and to the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning, one day. And God said, let there be firmament in the midst of the water, and let it separate between water and water. So God made the firmament, and separated between the waters which were beneath the firmament of the waters which were above the firmament. And it was so. And God called the firmament heaven, and there was evening and morning the second day. Now I handed that first piece of paper out, or second piece, to you. And that's probably, if you look at that real well, I want you to look at the Jewish illustration on that. Because that, I'm visual. And so a lot of the stuff that I do, I have to hand out as visual, because when I hear him talking like this, I sit down and draw it out and say, oh, this is what it means. So that Jewish illustration on that second page shows you the mayhem, it's called in Hebrew. So you see the waters above, and you see the waters below that I just read. And that's called the firmament. It's Raka, it's the expanse of heaven. So this is what God's going to do. He's going to expand what heaven is. So you have the upper and the lower. And then, he calls it good. And God said, let the waters beneath the heaven be gathered into one area, and let the dry land appear. And it was so. So God called the dry land earth, and the gathering of the waters he called seas. And God saw it was good. And God said, let the earth sprout vegetation, herbage yielding seed, fruit trees yielding fruit after its kind, containing its own seeds on the earth. Now, we talked a little bit on Friday night about seed. Look how many times seed is right here in Genesis. It's Genesis 11. We're reading a lot about seed. And as I said, remember the seed, because this seed is going to go all the way through. And it was so. And the earth brought forth vegetation, herbage yielding seed after its kind, and the trees yielding fruit, each containing its seed after its kind. And God saw it was good, and there was evening, and there was morning, the third day. Okay, so what happens, what this Jewish illustration does, somehow if you've got waters above and waters below, the Jewish way of looking at it, well, these two somehow have to connect. So, the Torah, where the line goes down, is going to connect the two of them. And the Torah becomes the Torah, or it becomes Yeshua. You can look at it that way, to connect the two to become one. And so this is how we're going to enter into this thing, to become one with Yeshua. Raka is a Strong's word, and it means, an extended surface, a solid expanse, a firmament. An expanse flat as the base supports the firmament as the heavens support the waters above. And it comes from Raka, which means meaning to beat, stamp out, spread out, stretch, as in spreading of clouds. So this is how, the earth was formed, how God, formed that. And then Genesis 1:10, and the gathering together that, that I read on verse 1:10, it's Strong's word, it's a mikvah. And we find mikvah all the way through the Bible. Again, that's in the New Testament. We're going to have another mikvah, at Moses at the Red Sea, the crossing the Red Sea, where, what's the purpose of a mikvah? To clean yourself. So here God's going to clean the earth up, and he's going to wait, he's going to look for it, it's going to hurt, and he's expecting what he's going to be doing. And so I made a chart there for you to fill in, your days. If you notice, you got 6 days there in the creation. Mm-hmm. And you got formed and filled. I don't know whether you guys have ever looked at it that way, but you've got the first 3 days are formed, the second 3 days are going to be filled. Okay? So, you can fill that in to figure out, what those are. If you don't know, then, you can see me and I'll help you fill in the blanks.
Is there a specific reason you have a box there at the bottom?
Yeah, 6-day creation, what's the next day?
The seventh God rested.
Right, Sabbath.
Okay. So it's reason the box Sabbath.
Yeah.
Okay.
Seventh day is Sabbath day. It's just like being back in school. Isn't this fun?
Yes.
So much like this story.
You like it, don't you?
But she's speaking slower, so we're making
I'm
progress.
trying.
You're doing awesome.
I'm trying. Okay, so day one. What's going to be day one? What was formed on day one?
The word
Heavens
above.
and earth.
The light. Yep. He formed light, and he's going to separate the light from darkness. You need a pen? How did I know that, Sarah? Okay. Okay, day 2. What's day 2?
Yeah.
He's going to form, now in day 2 would be form.
Okay.
He's going to form water above, which is going to be turn into be the atmosphere. And the waters below are going to become what? The oceans. You can get one. Okay. So that's the oceans. Okay, day 3 is going to be what?
Wait a minute, I'm still trying to write the number 2.
Okay.
So water is
He's formed water
Oceans.
above, which would be the atmosphere, and the waters below, which are the oceans. Okay, day 3, he's going to form dry land. And he's going to fill the land with vegetation. Okay, day 4, we're on the filled side now. He's filled the heavens with the lights. That's where you're going to get the sun, moon, and stars. Day 5, he's going to fill the waters below with fish.
fish and birds, right?
Fish and birds, yeah. Fish in the waters and birds above.
You can sing the Donut Man song.
I know.
The grandkids know it really well.
Day 6, he's going to fill the dry land with animals.
And then man.
And he created man, right? Created for them. Well, that's a different way, to looking at it, and helps you sort of memorize, what was done on each day, throughout creation. Okay, so. So, if you look at your chart, you're going to see your first thing, your first sentence is, for the first sentence in the first sentence in it, is Bereshit.
Okay, where are you? I lost
I'm
you.
on your first piece of paper there,
Okay, with the sentence at the top.
at the top, right?
Okay.
We see Bereshit, Ber Elohim et ha-shemayim ha-eretz. Okay, so what I did was I broke this thing down with you. With the first, this is unusual when you see, Genesis, instead of the first letter in the Hebrew alphabet is Aleph. And Aleph is the third letter in there, but Genesis is going to start with a bet, and he starts with a bet, which I've got on that first line, because bet means it's a roof. You see the roof being the top part of the bet. You see the wall going down and the floor, and and it means a house. So you see from Genesis 1:1 that God is creating a house. This is his whole thing. He wants a house. The next thing you see, if you take the next 3 letters, which again I've broken it down, which is your Shin, Aleph, and Resh, and the Shin, remember Hebrew reads from right to left. So the Resh is your first letter, the Aleph is that middle letter, and the Shin is, the farthest letter on the left. That's where we get the, it means head or Rosh, and that of course is where we're going to get Rosh Hashanah from, because it's the head of the year, the first of the year. And then the next letter in that first phrase is a Yud, which it looks like a little comma, and a Tav.
It's apostrophe.
Right. And that, Tav and is numbers just like in our alphabet. We have A is number 1, B is number 2. They do the same thing in the Hebrew alphabet, except it changes. But Tav is 400, Yud equals a 10, and that's 410 years, and that's the amount of time that Solomon's temple stood. It's 410 years. If you go on, a little bit further, you've got a Bet and a Resh. And this is where, and that means bar or son. This is where Simon Bar Jonah comes from. And it's also Jonah, which is, you're going to find Simon Bar Jonah, son of Jonah. And it's that word, you get your bat and bar mitzvah, which boys at the age of 13 have bar mitzvahs and girls have bat mitzvahs at 12. And it means a son I have prepared, and it means number 6, or God made man. So here, all in this first verse, these first few letters, you get almost the whole creation story just in this first verse. You go a little bit further, and you have the Aleph and the Tav, and that's et. And, if you're looking at the line up above, and Yeshua is the Aleph and Tav. And what happens in Hebrew, you have, I don't think it happens in the English language, where it points to a direct object. So et points to a direct object. Direct object, in this case, is going to mean Yeshua. That's what it's doing. The next one is Vav, and it means and, because you got your Vav, Aleph, and Tav. And because Tav is attached to it. If Tav wasn't attached to it, it would take on a totally different meaning. But because the Tav is attached to it, it means returns to heaven and appears on earth. Now, who returned from heaven and appeared on earth?
Jesus.
It's right. It's all in this first line.
Wow.
All in this first line in the book. And then you got the Aleph, which is a silent letter in the Hebrew alphabet, and it means Lord, Master, Adonai. And that's why they say God is silent. Because through the Old Testament, he did what? Exactly. He spoke through the prophets. So, again, you got your, you see the Yud there. The Aleph that I made out there. The Yud is 6 in the value. The two Yuds are 10 in value. The Vav is, 6. And you take those and you've got 26. Right hand is physical, left hand is spiritual. And then people say the Vav is the ladder that connects the hand of God to man. This is all I'm learning to do there. And of course, 6 is going to be the perfect number. Augustine is going to explain that God could not have created the world in an instant, but chose to do it in a perfect number of 6 days. Abraham or Sarah, do you know who Pierre Fermat is? You never studied any of his theories in school? Do you remember who he was? Pierre Fermat. He's the one that come up with the perfect 6s.
I'm going to plan.
I don't know whether you knew who he was or not. He's interesting, if you ever get a time to look into that. They're perfect numbers. They're integers, which are the sums of positive and proper divisors. So, if you got, 6 would be 1 plus 2 plus 3, or 28 or 496, and it goes like that way. And the first word in the Bible is made up of 6. The first verse in the Bible is 28 letters, and you got this French mathematician that showed that 26 is the only number that occupies a gap between a square and a cube. And that's where you get the Yud, Hey, Vav, Hey. It's going to be 26 letters. So it's 26 is the number of God, 26 generations from creation to when Moses receives the Torah. That's all in that number, in 26. And that's why on that second page you have the Yud, Hey, Vav, Hey to show the number 26 on it. Yeah, you guys lost yet or you okay?
I'm catching up.
You're catching up, okay. So, the name of God, Yud, Hey, Vav, Hey, equals 26. Perfect cubes, 26. 6 surfaces, 8 corners, 12 edges. You're going to see that as a cube that comes down from heaven for the New Jerusalem. So this is how this is going to tie into the book of Revelation. Salt crystals, believe it or not, form a perfect cube. I didn't know that. I thought that was good. Let's see, I think I did all this. So I'm going to repeat it. We also see in the word created, the Hebrew word bara, that's in there, and it means nothing into something. So only God can take nothing and turn it into something. It's his creation. So day 1, the spirit of Elohim moved, and there was darkness and light. God hovered over the surface, of the waters. Hovered is a root word, and that's where we looked at, it's rachif, and it means shaking or moving or fluttering. Isaiah 42:5 said, "Thus saith God Adonai, who created the heavens and separated them out, who stretched out the earth and all that grows from it, who gives breath to the people on it, and spirit to those who walk on it, and the spirit to them that walk therein. So we can see how Isaiah, which I said ties into Genesis. That would have been the half-Torah portion. Day 2, we looked at, the heavens with the Shemin, the waters, the Mayhem, the waters above, the firmament. We looked at Raka and Raka, we looked at those two words. So you have upper substance, lower substance. Basically, they mirror each other. And that's what talked about in Ezekiel 1:22 and 25, and it's in Ezekiel 10:1 and Daniel 12:3. Raka is also associated with the wings of cherubim. So, we find, day 5, we find the creation of all the birds, so that's the fluttering too. Day 3, in Genesis, it says, let the waters above be gathered into one place and let the dry land appear. Each sprout vegetation, plant yielding seeds, fruit trees. Trees is etz, it's a Hebrew word etz. On the earth bearing fruit in their kind, which is seed in them, and it was so. In this verse you have seeds and trees used 2 or 3 times. Anytime I'm telling you see, when you're reading the Bible and you see words repeated 2 and 3 times, you take note because God's trying to get a point across. Why is seed so important? Why is trees etz so important? Because this is going to be a pattern that you're going to have to watch because it's going to go through Torah and through the Bible. Gathered, meaning gathered, collected, come together. The waters covered the planet as it's being drained to allow God to create the earth. And gathered together is the Hebrew word we talked about, mikvah. And so this verse, it's talking about the seed, but Strong said it means mikvah. A mikvah is what the Jewish people said, they become unclean. It's for purification purposes. God's going to clean the earth up. He's not going to put man into an earth that's polluted. It's going to become polluted because man's going to pollute it, but originally it wasn't. You also get that word mikvah. You also get the word hope out of the word mikvah. It's a kaf vav he, and you find that in Ruth 1:12. And our hope is in Him, and so we gather to Him, who is our mikvah, for our purification is in Him. Romans 6:3-5 says that we have been immersed in Him, in the mikvah. Okay? So our lives are not our own. We walk in a new way because we have been mikvah with Him. We've been cleansed through Him. Now the challenge for each one of us is to keep clean. Yeah. Because, Bible says also we sin daily. So none of us are perfect in this walk. Day 4, creation of the sun, moon, and stars to govern the day and the night for signs and seasons, for modems. Remember, we got modems that we have to keep. They're perpetual. He made these in the beginning in Genesis and day 4. So if He made them on day 4, that didn't mean we stop them in 2014, 15, or whatever it is. We continue with these, and that's why we celebrate Sukkot. That's why we do the Feast of Tabernacles. That's why we celebrate, Passover, because they were to be, perpetually done. So as far back as day 4 creation, we find that. And so the modems become the festivals that we celebrate. Psalm 104:19 said, He made the moon for the seasons. The sun knows the place of its setting. So every month the Jewish families rededicate their homes on the new moon because the new moon governs the months. So that's why you have a month that we go 1 to 30, 1 to 31. Their months might go 1 to 15. Because, the new moon will appear in the new dedication. That's why they're not on the same cycle. They're on the lunar calendar. And we're not. And it's interesting. Jewish people will send out 2 people and they look for the new moon. And once, and it's posted, once the new moon's posted, people rededicate their houses. What did they do it? I mean, think about all the ash and trash that comes into your house every day. Every day, and then you just let it pile up day after day after day. You never rededicate your house. So think of what's sitting in your house. You never cleaned out. And so this way they rededicate, every new moon. And so again, the day starts out in the evening. It's Erev, it's E-R-V. And Erev means to pledge or to guarantee. Morning is Boker, that's why I said Boker Tov, good morning, if you're in Hebrew. And it means to inquire or frequent or visit. So from these 2 words, Erev and Boker, we see that God is in charge and that He operates within the time frame, and He operates in this time frame. How's He going to operate? in his seasons. He could care less about your seasons. You know, he could care less about Halloween. That's not his season. Okay? So he operates within. If you want to move with God, you have to move in his seasons, not man-made seasons. As we saw with the seeds, as the trees being repeated earlier, we see here that the repeat of sign for seasons, greater light, lesser light. When words repeat in Scripture, pay attention again to them. I'm going to keep emphasizing this because it's important. So day 4, we find the light on the earth, day and night, and a separation of light from the darkness. And day 5, you have the birds and the fish were created. King James says to bring forth abundantly. So when they bring forth abundantly, Strong's, you know, says it's a definition, it swarms, it teems, it multiplies. So in this verse, it means that they were multiplied in numbers, meaning they bred abundantly. How else are they going to recreate quickly? So they did it abundantly. That's what that's saying. Fowl and Strong's, is Hebrew 5775, and the definition is flying creatures, insects, birds, winged insects, dinosaurs that flew, whatever. Root word of that is ufa. It's O-P-H or L-U-M-P-H, and it means to fly, to hover, or to fly away. Firmament is Strong's. We went over that, the Raka, and the heavens is Mayan. So verse 21, the creature is Nephesh, which is a soul, a self, a lie, creature, appetite, mind. It's a living being. We have a Nephesh. And sometimes our Nephesh does real good, and sometimes our Nephesh does horribly. Okay? You know, because that's where our desires and our passions and, our, emotions all come from the Nephesh. So when you see things going every which way, that's where you need to tell your Nephesh to get under control. Just stop it. Really. Just stop it and get under control of God. And of course, a living being is what? Because we're living beings because, we have life within the blood. And you're going to find that's important because you're going to have to remember that. So the man himself, it's a person, an individual, the seat of the appetites or the seat of his emotions and passions. So God saw it was good. He blessed it. He said, be fruitful and multiply. And it was evening, morning, and day 5. And that's something that's repeated. We saw that, Friday night. Be fruitful and multiply. That's what he wanted them to do, to reproduce. So land animals and man, cattle, domestic animals, creeping things, reptiles, all that's going to come along into being. So the beasts of the earth, are wild animals that were created. So he's going to create man in the image of God, Adam. He's a human being created by God himself for his appointed purposes. And God still has a special plan for man. He hasn't given up on man at all. In Jeremiah 10:2, he says, thus saith the Lord, learn not the way of the heathen, and be not dismayed at the signs of the heaven, for the heathen are dismayed at them. He created both male and female.
What scripture is that?
That is Jeremiah 10:2. So Adam is derived from Adama, which means earth. He was made.
How do you spell that?
Adama is A-D-A-M-A-H. So he was made in the likeness and the image of God. And unlike animals, Adam was created to know, love God, to talk to him, and have fellowship with him. What an awesome thing that must have been to just have God come and talk to you and tell you stuff. So male, female, both alike in regards to their spiritual nature to God. In verse 28, God blessed them, first blessing, and he gives them the command to be fruitful and multiply. Now, how many times have we heard that?
A bunch.
We keep hearing it over and over, be fruitful and multiply. In other words, produce a family. That's what you do when you produce, and, when he says produce a family, have a home, bake, have a house, build yourself a house, okay? And so now we find God saying it was very good. And the other days of creation was good, but this was very good. In chapter 2, we're into chapter 2, it says, thus the heavens and the earth were finished, so everything is finished. and in all their array. But the seventh day God completed his work which he had done, and he abstained on the seventh day from all his work which he had done. And God blesses the seventh day and sanctified it, because he abstained from all his work which God created to make. And these are the products of heaven and earth that were created on the day that Hashem God made heaven and earth. Now the trees of the field were not yet on the earth, and all the herbs of the field had not yet sprouted, for Hashem God had not sent rain upon the earth, and there was no man to work the soil. So a mist descended from the earth and watered the whole surface of the soil. And Hashem God formed man of dust from the ground, and he blew into his nostrils the soul of life, and man became a living being. So, here it's finished. He's finished everything he's going to do. That's kala, and it means to accomplish or to cease or to end, to be finished. I've done everything. I can't do any more, so it's finished. And then it says, all the host of them, is a sava, and it means that which goes forth. It's an army, a warfare. You got warfare right in chapter 2. An army, a host, or it's a complete, an organized army, or a host of angels, of sun, moon, stars, of the creation. So you've got a lot there. Verse 4, goes on to say, and these are the products of heaven and earth. So these are the generations of heaven and earth. So at this point, all creation is finished. The next thing will be the generations of Adam, Noah, Abraham, Sarah, right on down the line. But the creation of the earth at this point is finished. And you find in that verse, in the day. Now again, this is a Hebrew idiom. And that Hebrew idiom means it's for at the time when. So at the time when it was finished. Verse 7 goes on to say it was formed, which is Yetzar. It comes from a root word, was to form or fashion as a potter molding clay into a vessel. So this is what he's going to do with Adam. So he formed man from the dust of the ground, breathes into him, into his nostrils, which is the rohak, which is the breath of life. Verses 8 through 17, we go into the garden, the Garden of Eden. And garden in Strong's is Gan, it's Gan, and it's an enclosure. But figuratively, it's of a bride. So here God wants a bride. Okay? He still wants a bride. Face fact, even though you're guys, you're going to be a bride one day with him. So Jehovah Elohim planted a garden in Eden, which means pleasure, and then he puts man in the garden, like a bridal chamber. He was creating a special place that he could get intimate with man. So we find from the very beginning this was Jehovah Elohim's desire. So Gan Eden, which is paradise, was a place for man to have everything that he needed. And God made the trees to grow. And trees you find, when you really look at them throughout Scripture, remember they're called ets, and they're symbolic of men. So when you think about reading trees, think of a man. Okay? Which would be good for food. And then Gan Eden was the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Now knowledge is Daleth, and it means a discernment or understanding or wisdom. So he's put this tree in there for discernment. You got to figure this out. You got to have discernment in this thing. Good is pleasant. It's tov. Oh how good it is when brethren dwell together. Tov. That's what that is. And that means pleasant, agreeable. Evil is ra. It means bad, evil, misery, giving pain, unhappiness, sad. The tree of life is the Torah. That's where life is in the Torah. So we find that man has the ability to choose. He's going to give man that ability. And from Eden, a river went out that would be with 4 other rivers that parted and coming out of the garden formed 4 heads representing authority. So your first one is Pison, which means to increase. And it comes from a root word which means to spring about, or to frisk, or to act proudly. Imagine a river acting proudly. I can't, but that's what it means. And the Nephel, which is another, meaning, in the Strong's, it means to be scattered, to be spread. And, the next one is the Halava, and it's the land surrounding it, and it means a circle. So, you can picture this river circling the Garden of Eden. Now, just remember the Garden of Eden could be miles big. It couldn't, you just don't look like, okay, it's a small little area. This thing could be huge. Okay. The root word it comes from is to twist, to whirl, to dance, to fear, tremble, travail, to be in anguish or pain, to anxiously be born, or to wait longingly. So that's, that's the hala. The Gihon, again, would be another land that surrounded it, and it means bursting forth, to give birth, it means rushing, and it's going to come out of Cush, which is Ethiopia, which means black. The Hiddekel, means rapid, and it's better known today as the Tigris River, and it's going to flow toward the east. Fourth river, Euphrates, is Pereth, and it means fruitfulness, sweet water, and pleasant tasted. It's the largest and longest river in Western Asia. River, is Nahar, it's a stream or an underground streams. The root is to shine, to beam, the flow stream. So the word river, we can see that the rivers is a beam of light. Now, how many of you have ever pictured the rivers in the garden being a beam of light? I hadn't, but when you take it apart, it does. And there is a radiance as the river flows. So this wasn't, anything. So that speaks volumes to me, because when you read the book of Revelation and you start reading the rivers, about the rivers. So it sounds like to me that these rivers somehow carried light. They had to. Think about the lake of fire. That's going to take on a totally different meaning when you think about it. Okay, I give you something to think about.
Yep.
Exodus 5:1, Moses asked Pharaoh to let the people go into the wilderness for a feast unto him. Feast and strong means to hold a feast, to hold a festival, to make a pilgrimage. Keep a pilgrim, a feast, celebrate, dance. The root word means to encircle, encompass, describes a circle, draw around, make a circle. So from the word feast, we come to the root meaning of festival, which means circle. The feasts are part of the circle of the seasons. The river that went through Eden and the land that surrounded Eden, from the Pishon to increase to the Gihon to burst forth with fruit, will direct us back to three main feasts. God keeps pushing you back this way, go back this way. Esau, Shavuot and Sukkot. And of course, Sukkot we just celebrated, involves the first fruits. First fruits of the barley are urged to be faithful unto death, which will merit the crown of life. So you want the crown of life? It's all right here in Genesis on what you have to do. Yep. Verses 15 and 16, man was to keep the garden from getting weeds, but was given a warning not to eat from the tree of the good and evil, and if he did, he would die. So die is muth, and it means to die as penalty, to be put to death, to die prematurely by neglect of wise moral conduct. A lot of people die prematurely today. Wise moral conduct. Chapters 18 through 25 of creation. Adam's job was to till the ground, but his job also was to name animals that Elohim brought to him, but there was none for a helpmate for him. Helpmate is strong, it's Ezer, and it means to help, to aid, and it comes from a root word which means to support or to be helped. So Adam falls into a deep sleep. Deep sleep is a deep sleep or a trance, is what the Strong says. And it comes from a root word to fall into a heavy sleep, be unconscious, be fast asleep, or to sleep heavily. So he takes one of Adam's ribs, which is tasla, which means the side, or a rib or a beam. And from that root word, it means to be limp or lean. Okay? So flesh, from that is Besar, it's Bet, Shen, Resh, and it means flesh of humans, of animals, the body itself. So from the root of Basar means to bear news, to bear tidings, to publish, to preach, to show forth, to announce. So all the way back to Genesis, we find the good news. It's not a New Testament thing at all. It's Old Testament. So God made woman, and he brought her to man. So woman was fully developed, fully born. It wasn't like a little baby like we have today. Verse 25 says naked. It's a roam. It means naked, and it comes from the root word to be subtle or be shrewd, to be crafty, beware, be prudently. So this will come back to play in chapter 3 when they ate from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. So they did not act prudently, is what happened. Chapter 3, you got the serpent that goes in there, which, it means a snake, a serpent. One time the serpent could talk and walk and was very shrewd. Okay, crafty. This set up the stage for women to fall into this trap. So the woman told the serpent what the Lord said to them. Verse 4, the devil twisted what the Lord had told them, and they ate from the tree and gave her husband some too. And that very moment, everything that we knew they were not supposed to do, they did. And so suddenly, their eyes were open and they knew they were naked. And before, they had no knowledge that they were naked. All their innocence was gone, and so they sewed fig leaves together to make themselves loincloths. Loincloths is a girdle, a belt, a girdle, a loin covering. It's an armor, which is interesting because you're going to find this is going to tie over into the priesthood, where they wear the girdles and the loincloths and stuff. It comes from the root word anapin. Okay, so suddenly they hear God, Jehovah Elohim, walking in the garden again in the cool of the day, ruach, feminine noun, meaning wind, breath, mind, spirit. So we find the loincloths where there's a girdle like that Elohim God is going to, make, and they're going to walk in the cool of the day. This means the wind because they heard a sound and they heard when he was walking. And man tries to blame the woman, but God knew, even before they spoke a word, you can't hide from God. You can make all the excuses you want, God knows the truth. The result was the serpent would no longer walk, but would move along on the earth. Women would suffer pain in childbirth. The ground would now be cursed, meaning Adam would have to work the soil. And I don't know whether if anybody's ever gardened here, and when it's hot, dry, and the soil's tough, it's hard to work it.
It's hard work anyway.
Yeah.
That just makes
But,
it worse when
yeah,
it's dry.
Exactly. And so that was no easy task, So now there's thorns and thistles, which he didn't have to contend with before, and now he's got to do that. So just to get something to eat. Just so they could eat now, they got to work at it. Verse 20, Adam is going to name his wife Eve, which is Havda. Up to that point, she was woman. That was her name, woman. Eve means living life or living mother of all living. The rabbi said that the translation is wrong, which is interesting. Instead of being living, they say it should be clan. Now that's going to be interesting too, because when we get over a little bit further in Genesis, it's going to switch to families to clans. And even when you do research, like we're doing on genealogy, I've come across the clans.
Yes.
So this is where this is going to first come. It's all the way back here. So Eve was the mother of every human clan. Jehovah Elohim God made garments, tunics, undergarments, a long shirt-like garment, usually of linen. Why did they do linen? Any idea?
Let your skin really breathe.
You don't sweat. And think about it, if you sweat that, it's going to be nasty to God. So when the high priest and everything went in, the priest went into the holy, or the high priest into the holy of holies, you didn't want to go in there sweating. So that's why he made him linen. At the beginning of the Torah, Jehovah Elohim God clothed Adam, but in the end, the Torah, he buries Moses. Isn't that interesting? And thus it begins. Man is driven out of the garden. Cherubim are placed at the east with a flaming sword to keep them out forever of going back into paradise. When we were in Israel a couple of years ago, I remember pointing out to Darlene, I think you guys saw it too, where, when we went out and we were going down toward the Dead Sea, you would see Adam this.
Yeah.
So you could almost follow the direction.
Adam's highway.
And the way he went. It's fascinating to me. Chapter 4 starts off with Adam knowing Eve, and she conceived and bore Cain. Knew is yada. It's to know, to learn, to perceive, to find out, and discern. Cain is kain. It means possession, transitory, temporary, empty, vain. Be careful what you name your kids, because it's Abel is Hevel, and his name means breath, acquired tragically brief. A few months ago I taught about this at Sukkot. Remember, Cain and Abel were not children at this point, but 20-year-old men. You think of kids arguing and fighting. These were 20-year-old men. So Cain and Abel brought their offering in the process of time. In Strong's, it means at the end of time or end of days. So here we are in 2014, and what do you hear people talk about? We're living in the last days. This is the end of time that we're living in. Well, guess what? It's all the way back here in Genesis. So we've been living in the end of time since Genesis. So, but that's what it is. End of days or end of time. So here in Genesis 4:2, you have the first mention of end of days. It's not a new thing, folks. It's in the Hebrew.
What word was that?
Verse 2, Genesis 4:2. It's Mikah Yayim. It's Miketz, and that's Yamim in the Hebrew, and that means end of days. So Cain's going to bring the fruit of the ground, and Abel's brought the firstling of his flock. And these were offerings, which in Hebrew, is a minka, and it means a gift or a tribute or an offering, a sacrifice, meat, gift offered, whatever, to divinity. Verse 5 says that he had not respect. Now, respect means to look at in dismay, and this made Cain upset. The King James says he was wroth, and his countenance fell. Wroth means he was hot, he was furious, he became angry, he burned, everything in him just kindled. Countenance means pay and face, so he was literally, this tells me that he was right in his face and said, I'm really mad at you, and he's pointing at him, his face was just, he was angry. I can even picture him just shaking and saying, what is wrong with you? He was mad, 20-year-olds fighting.
Yeah, the Amplified says exceedingly angry and indignant.
Yep. So Jehovah Lord asked what he had done, and his countenance had fallen, and why he was so wroth. And Cain then kills Abel while they were in the fields. Jehovah Lord asked Cain, where is your brother? To which he replies, am I my brother's keeper? And the voice of your brother cries to me from the ground. That tells us so much in that verse that the blood speaks. The blood has a voice. So every time somebody kills, that blood is crying out to God. Every soldier that's been killed in war, everybody that's been killed, because of being shot, the blood speaks. It goes into the ground and it speaks. Blood in Hebrew is dan. It's D-A-N. Cries means to cry out, to call out, to cry for help. So by killing Abel, he killed Abel's unborn descendants. He killed the seeds. Same thing happens today with abortions. We're killing the descendants. You don't know what those, babies could have been, what they would have grown, but you're killing future descendants. You're killing the seed. Remember I said, remember the seed. Here we're weaving it through. So we learned that this blood had a voice, and that the earth was cursed and will not yield like it should. And now Cain will be a fugitive and a vagabond. So wherever Cain lives, this curse will follow him, and the soil will not produce. No, they're really not well. It's like, just throw your hands up, say, this ain't gonna work. No matter where I go, I'm cursed, And you'd think people would know something, which they did. Verse 4:13 says, my punishment is Strong's, it's Avon, and it means guilt or punishment of an iniquity. So he's finally realizing, his punishment is more. It says, than I can bear. That's where then I can bear is Strong's NASA. And it means to lift up, bear up, take. Also, that's where NASA comes from. The astronauts, NASA, comes all the way back from there. Verse 4:14, and so he is driven out of the land and away from the face of Jehovah. Away from Jehovah is away from the divine protection. That's what Deuteronomy 31:18 says. I don't know about you, but I wouldn't want to be without the divine protection of God. Verse 4, verse 15, mark, so he's going to put a mark on him. The mark is oath, and it means a sign, signal, a distinguishing mark. Now in the history, the sages say that the mark was a horn in the center of his forehead. Like you see the unicorns today. You think that's new? It's not. It's all, there's nothing new under the sun. The more I study this, it's not. So he put this mark on Cain, and everybody that would see the mark wouldn't kill him. That was to keep him from being killed. So verse 4:16, Cain's going to go to the land of Nod, which means wandering or restlessness. And this is exactly what Cain is. He's a wanderer now at this point. He's being separated from God. Many people today are living like Cain. They're wandering from place to place, never finding rest. They jump from church to church to church. They never find rest in the church, thus not knowing the peace of living in his presence. Verse 4, chapter 4:17 gives us information on Cain. He was a builder, a city, a dweller who took great honor in self. There is mention of Cain's wife. Who is she? No one knows for sure. She could have been his sister or his half-sister. Remember we talked about that a little bit. Since Adam lived to be 930 years old, they probably had more children. Okay. H. Leopold states it this way: Cain's wife must have been his sister who followed him into exile, for Adam had sons and daughters according to 5:4. Marriage to a sister at this early stage of development of the human race cannot be considered wrong or unnatural. If according to divine purpose the human race is to develop from one pair, then the marriage of brothers and sisters as well as close relatives will for a time be a necessity. Later on, the nations may see it fit to classify such unions as incestuous and seek to keep human race from running its shoots back to the parent stem. But in the earlier history of mankind, the union of those closely related was not aboard. Abraham's wife was his half-sister. We know that for a fact. That's in 2012. So Cain had a son. He's going to name him Enosh. And he means dedicated, beginner, or initiated. Cain names the city after his son, so instead of glorifying God, he is now honoring his works and his family. So the ungodly seed is going to grow. Not the Jesus seed. The names of Enoch's children give us a better meaning of how the seed is being planted. His first son, Irad, or Erod as it's pronounced in Hebrew, means fleet, a wild ass, a heap of empire, and a dragon. The great-grandson of Cain, Mebuliel, he means smitten by God, who proclaims God. The next son means who is of God. And the fourth in the descent of Cain is Lamech, and he means powerful or poor, made low. Fifth in the lineage from Cain is an ungodly seed, were religious, but their religion was only worldly, man-made. Just like today, beautiful liturgies, beautiful words, beautiful music, but without the promise of God's forgiveness and the sin through the shed blood of Yeshua Messiah. 2 Timothy 3:5 says, having the form of godliness, but denying the power therein, from such turn away. So Lamech's going to come along. He's going to take 2 wives. And this is just 7 generations. Everything is a mess in 7 generations. Marriage is the hardest hit. 1 man for 1 wife. Now Lamech takes 2 wives. He's going to take a woman by the name of Ada, and her name means an assembly and ornament of beauty. And the second one is Tasilla, and she means shade and the tingling of the ear. So, from the names of the 2 wives, you can see that Lamech was attracted to beauty and the pleasures of flesh. And this ungodly culture will continue in Lamech's children. Be careful what you do, because it affects your generations and generation and generation and generation. Eventually somebody's going to have to stand up and say it stops here. Because it doesn't, it just continues to go. Tent is Ohel, it's nomad tent, and that's symbolic of the wilderness life and the transient life. Jubal means stream. He's the inventor of the musical instruments, trumpets that runs, and he invented string harps and flutes and the reed pipe. I don't understand why churches don't like musical instruments. It's all the way back here in Genesis. Tubal Cain, he was worldly possessions, possession of confusion. And he's a maker of brass jewelry, utensils. Nama is loveliness, beauty, agreeable. So the ungodly seed descendants developed a society that sought revenge, murder, boasted in itself, and felt self-sufficient. And we don't need God, we can do everything. You see that today. Oh, we don't need God. Oh, all these people that, don't want nothing to do with God. We don't need God. And then it picks up at chapter 4:25. It picks up again on Adam and Eve. They have another son named Seth. Now, Seth means compensation. So the chapter ends with the birth of Enosh. With the birth of Enosh, man begins to call on the name Shem of Jehovah. Chapter 5 is the genealogy of Adam. Adam was 130 years old when he was born into good lineage. Another note, you see two names in this series of descendants, Seth and Enosh and Lamech, are all identical to those among the children of Cain, but they're different people. So don't think that's the same people, they're different. Just like today, you've got everybody, you got people named Nancy, you got people named Sharon, you got people named Darlene, but they're different people. Okay, so this is the same thing here. 10 generations from Adam to Noah. Adam, means self-appointed. So when you get into this, you're going to find that, bless them. He's Genesis 5 is talking about connecting and going all the way back to Genesis 1:22, where God tells them to be fruitful and multiply. It's a double meaning, and till the soil, and to open the womb, to till the soil and open the womb. Adam lived 130 years, had Seth. 30 is significant, when you look at the 30 years, because in Luke 3:23, Yeshua begins his ministry at 30 years old. And Numbers 4:3 says that Yeshua would fulfill the priestly requirement. So here, if you don't have the Old Testament, you would never know that it's all the way back in Numbers 4, chapter 3, that Yeshua, when he comes, is going to fulfill it. Numbers, a piece of silver that would portray Yeshua is 30. Okay, prophesying Zechariah, would prophesy in 11, 12, and 13 that, he would be portrayed with 30 pieces of silver. Again, the Old Testament fulfilling the New. The 30th time Noah's name has appeared, he's building an altar to God, the place of dedication and offering the blood. And of course, the covering of the tabernacle is going to be 30 cubits in there. So 30 means a lot. 5:4, possible the population at the time of Noah. I found this fascinating. I had no idea. I often wondered, how big or how small was the population during the time of Noah? Well, they estimate that at the time of Noah there was 2 billion people. 2 billion. So 2 billion people get wiped off the face of earth except for 8 people. Is that mind-boggling? That to me is mind-boggling. So Seth is going to carry on the seed of Adam, redeemed but fallen. His name means appointed or set in place. Adam would live 800 years after Seth was born, but Seth would be with Adam all those years. So what do you think Adam's going to do for all those years? Teach him. He's going to teach him, look, this is what I did wrong. You don't want to do what I did wrong. You don't want to follow my footsteps. 8 in Scripture and 80, is newness and cycles. Means start a new cycle, and then it begins to corrupt himself. 8 people in the ark, it's 8 days, when you circumcise a baby, a male baby, it's 8 days. King David was the 8th son of Jesse. Aaron and his son's ministry started on the 8th day, lasts for 8 days celebration, and if you take Psalm 119, which is the longest psalm in the Bible, it breaks down all the Hebrew letters into 22 sections and 8 verses on each one. That would be a study in itself. Just pick one of those and do those 8 verses and find out what's in it. So Genesis 5:5 says Adam lived 930. 9 is fruitful and is giving, and that talks about in Galatians and Corinthians, Galatians 5:22 and 23, and 1 Corinthians 12:7 and 10, which means bearing fruit and giving. Genesis 5:6 goes on to say Seth lived 105 and begot Enosh. So then, in those, if you take all the names apart in Genesis, you get and this is why you don't intermarry with idolaters, because that's what they were doing. It started here and will continue through the present day. Verse 8 in chapter 6 goes on to say that Noah found grace in the eyes of God. Found, means relates to communion and Passover. It's interesting. Found is matzah. Matzah. Passover. Communion. So figure. So here we got Noah found grace. Noah found communion. Noah found, Noah found Passover. Noah knows he's going to be protected. It's right there. Grace in Strong's means favor. Grace from one's protects life to encamp or to pitch a tent. And that's where chapter 6, verse 8 ends, because we started, the next thing started with Noah, which we did on Friday night. It's a lot.
Yes, it was.
Hope you got something out of that this morning.